Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Lime Ears Terra. So, Lime Ears is a brand that's been around since before I got into the hobby, but I haven't actually heard their stuff because, well, they're kind of a premium brand, and I've heard about them, heard of them, but it wasn't here until the Terra that I actually got a chance to listen to them. And the Terra kind of represents a bit of like an entry-level step for Lime Ears. As far as what I can tell on their website, they are a brand that has made IEMs for professional stage musicians as well as audiophiles. And this one is coming in at 1,100 euros, which is about 1,200 US dollars. So that makes it kind of entry level for them, but it is also, of course, still pretty expensive. And that kind of, raises the question, or just reminds me that a lot of times people ask me about these premium priced IEMs and wonder, like, what is the point of spending more than $1,000 on an earphone? And I think there's kind of like three main reasons you might want to consider it. Reason number one is maybe it's got exceptional sound, and it really does sound that much better than things that are cheaper. Although I'll say that this is getting increasingly rare given how good the cheap stuff is getting. Reason number two might be, some sort of like unique esoteric tuning that you can't get out of other cheaper IEMs, right? So if that happens to be your preference tuning and the only option is in the premium category, well, maybe there's a reason why you're going to have to spend more. And then the third reason is going to be things like physical form factor, build quality, aesthetics, preference, the story behind the IEM. And well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been living with the Lime Ears Terra and trying to figure out exactly what kind of premium IEM is this, and that's what we're going to talk about now. But before we do that, I guess a quick shout out to Lime Ears for sending this IEM for review. If you want to check out the Terra or anything else they've got, I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that out of the way, let us dive to the table, and we'll start with talking about the physical form factor, what comes inside the box, build quality, fit and comfort, all that jazz. Then we'll get into talking about the sound here on the Lime Ears Terra. We'll do some frequency response analysis, do some comparisons with some other similarly priced IEMs, and then I'll wrap this review up with a conclusion. So here's what you get inside the box. And first of all, I just behold this box. Okay, you can't totally see it here. Let me hold it up next to my head. This is a really pretty box. I like the packaging here, and even like the Terra logo. Nicely done, Lime Ears. Of course, a box isn't the IEM itself, but it's kind of like your first experience with it, and it's nice that they've done that well. And what you get inside the box is what you see here, which is a pretty decent spread for the price. You get let me put the IEM to the side for a second. You get a really nice little carry case, kind of this puck style. It's got a felt or almost like a suede inner. It feels really nice and soft. I like that. And then it's got, I'm guessing, a faux leather on the outside, but it comes in a cool green color that, frankly, like, I've seen this design, this kind of puck design for an IEM case a lot of times, but I've never seen one that looks, I think, this good. I really do like the way that they've done that. So nice job. It also comes with a little baggie, which I guess you could use to store your accessories, your other accessories, which include things like, of course, ear tips. It comes with full sets of these ear tips. I'm just highlighting one of each. But yeah, it comes with a full set of large, medium, and small foam tips, as well as a full set of what look like spin fit tips. I'm not totally sure they're spin fit tips, but they've got the spin fit mechanism on them, and they seem to be designed and built exactly like a spin fit CP100. So some nice ear tips, although I will say I don't think they're actually the best match for this IEM, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. They do also include a cleaning tool, and I guess a quick shout out to a couple of people who let me know the magnet on the back of these cleaning tools, which I never noticed until recently, is for managing little small batteries and hearing aids, because I guess that's what these cleaning tools are primarily made for. So thank you. But otherwise, you get the IEM itself, and I guess that will lead us into talking about the build quality on the IEM, and we'll start with the cable, which I think is actually a pretty nice looking cable. You can see that it roadie wraps quite well, but otherwise I do have some beefs with this cable, okay? So I'm going to unwrap it here, and I think beef number one is probably going to stand out, is that it's a little bit stiff and memory prone. I don't end up minding that so much in terms of usability, just because, I don't know, it tends to straighten out, I guess, on my head, but if you're looking for something that is super soft and pliable, that is not this cable. Interestingly, they do describe this as being an Effect Audio cable, and if you're not familiar with Effect Audio, they make very premium, high-end cables that are often very expensive as well. I'm not much of a spend a lot of money on a cable kind of guy, but I guess that's nice, but I think that the execution on this particular cable is not that great, because it is pretty stiff. And then the other bigger problem for me, much bigger problem, is this right here. This is the chin slider, ostensibly intended to cinch up any slack in the cable and make this fit a little bit tighter on your head. However, you might notice it just does not stay in place at all. This is the loosest chin slider I've ever seen. Probably the most useless chin slider. It just does not work even when I'm wearing it. And even worse than that, because it's like a metal slider that's rubbing up against a metal Y-split, it creates this high frequency sonic sound that transmits through this overly stiff cable into the earpieces. So I find it to be especially microphonic because of this, and kind of annoying, to be honest. I would, normally in a situation like this, I would actually cut off a useless chin slider like this, but because it's metal, I'm not confident that I'm going to be able to cut it off, so I'd probably just end up mangling it and making it look worse. So we'll leave it as is. But thankfully it is just your standard 2-pin connector, so you can swap it out with other cables if you choose. But certainly would hope that you wouldn't have to on an 1100 euro IEM. But that will bring us into talking about the earpieces here. And this is where I think these things, again, kind of like the packaging and the case, just really nice execution on the build quality and the aesthetic of the set. Now, obviously aesthetics are going to come down to personal choice, and this might not be your particular preference. I'll be honest, like for me, it's not my ideal aesthetic, but I think that the execution on it is really, really good. I'm impressed with it. I dig it. On the outside panel, you have, well, one, you have a glass panel on the outside, but the pattern that's underneath of it catches the light and glistens and changes colors in a way that I actually really like. It's interesting, here in the video, I'm looking at my monitor over here. It mostly just looks like red with little, blue and green speckles. But in person, from some angles, like the whole unit looks green. And then from other angles, the whole thing looks, predominantly red. And I think that's actually kind of cool. To be honest, like there were times when I wasn't listening to I wasn't using the product, and I was trying to remember, is it red or is it green? And then when I got it under light and was playing around with it, I was like, oh, it's both. It's both red and green, depending on how you look at it. So like right from here, as I'm looking at it, this looks really green. And then from here, it looks really, really red. I know here in the camera, it doesn't seem to be coming across entirely like that, but trust me, it's a cool effect. Apart from that, you have these shells, which are nicely rounded. They're all metal shells, if you're curious. And I guess I'll get into talking about the fit in a little bit, but the build quality is nice. They're nice and soft edges, no sharp edges or anything like that. The one thing that I will highlight is this chonker of a nozzle, which is both pretty wide in diameter and also especially long. This is why I personally don't think the spin fits are a very good fit for this IEM, because usually when I use spin fit CP100 tips, it's because I'm using an IEM that has a short nozzle and I want to kind of elongate it, right? CP100s have somewhat of a long fit on them. Whereas this nozzle is already a little bit on the too long side. So for me, I need to use a tip that effectively shortens the nozzle. And for me, that is the Moondrop spring tips do that pretty well. You can see that, as far as how much distance they're adding to the nozzle, it's basically none. In fact, if I wanted to, I could probably make the nozzle just about stick out the tip of these things, which isn't necessarily how I wear it. I think I wear it like that. But yeah, for me, a much shorter ear tip makes a whole lot more sense than the CP100. So your mileage may vary, of course. Everyone's ears are a little bit different, but I guess that will lead us into talking about the fit and comfort. So let me plug this thing into my ear while I talk about it. Take a look. Size-wise, like, front to back, I would say that this looks kind of like a medium size shell, right? Nothing particularly large about it. But because of that really long nozzle, you might notice that it's kind of crinkling up my ear right here. I think that just indicates like it is actually fitting or taking up a lot more space in my ear canal, sort of the ear canal entrance, than you might expect of a shell that otherwise looks pretty medium. And if I'm not using a shorter ear tip like this, it ends up fitting a little bit more like that, where it's kind of hanging outside of my ear and doesn't feel very stable. Like the back of the earpiece is not touching the inside of my ear. And all of the support of the IEM is coming from my ear canal. With this shorter ear tip, I can fit it a little bit deeper. I can get it, into the concha bowl and get a little bit more support from that. So I would say that in this state with the shorter ear tip, fit stability is pretty decent. Fit comfort is just okay because that nozzle is pretty long and it does feel a little bit on the invasive side. But at least the stability is good. And again, there's no sharp edges or anything like that. But it's just not, in my opinion, the most ergonomic earphone out there. It's very pretty IEM, but ergonomic, I don't know about that. So I think that is as much as I can tell you about the physical form factor as I rotary wrap this thing back into presentable state. So let's talk about the sound here on the Lime Ears Terra. And as we have been doing, we're going to go over to SquigLink to analyze the frequency response, which again, I'll mention. I think frequency responses are super, super useful for analyzing sound, getting a good sense for how something might sound in your ear, and also, once you've heard something, using a frequency response to kind of diagnose and explain what you're hearing. But also note that a frequency response, in my opinion, does not tell you everything about the sound. There's certainly limitations to our ability to measure this stuff. So just take it with a grain of salt, but nonetheless, I'll tell you how this thing measures and how it kind of compares with my sound or my sound impressions. So what you can see here on the frequency response, I think is a pretty decent indicator of what to expect. So you get a decent bit of bass boost here, a little bit of thinness here in the mid-range, and then a little bit of brightness here in the upper mid-range, sort of lower treble region, and then kind of like a smooth, like a well-extended but fairly relaxed upper treble presentation. You might notice this lighter dotted line in the back. That is the traditional Harman target, and you can see that this Lime Ears Terra lines up pretty well with the Harman target. There's probably the biggest deviation is going to be here in kind of like the mid-bass region, where I think that the Terra is not quite as thin sounding as the Harman target, but I also think it's not quite as meaty thick as it might look here in the graph. I think that emphasis here in the lower treble, upper mid-range again is, and also this dip here in the mid-range is contributing to still giving it an overall kind of thin clinical sound, which is generally how I would describe the sound signature on this. This is like Harmonish, a little bit meatier, a little bit fuller in the low end, but not that much. So it's still got that sub-bass emphasis, not a whole lot of kick drum emphasis, and a little bit of extra emphasis on kind of like the vocal region, which can give it kind of like a contrasty, bright, clinical, strong sense of clarity type of sound, more so than like a warm, laid back, relaxed, thick sound, right? If that helps. And I think that this graph does a pretty good job of that. Where would I see this maybe sounding different to my ear is mostly just, again, like this delta here between the green line and the light dotted line, in some IEMs could be pretty significant. That could be the difference between like sounding thin and sounding pretty thick and meaty. I still think that the Lime Ears Terra ends up sounding overall a little bit on the thin side, a little bit on the more clinical, clarity focused side, as I mentioned. So more to my kind of personal listening impressions. Generally, I would say that tonality is pretty pleasant. It's on the contrasty side again, a little bit of I would say a tasteful V, but kind of restrained V. It's not super aggressive in the bass, not super aggressive in the treble, but it definitely has a bit of emphasis there, which gives it that contrasty V-shaped sound. Again, strong on clarity. I think with that sound, you get a nice sense of image separation. So the distinction between instruments and sounds, like it's all very, very strong and clear. And because of that, you also get like a pretty nice sense of width from the stereo image, and even a decent sense of depth. Like I mentioned, the bass is emphasized there, but because it's mostly sub-bass emphasized, it's not going to be like dominating in like the kick drums or like droning or anything like that, but it does lend itself to a decent bit of depth to that stereo image. Vocals, I would say, are again a little bit on the edgy side because of that contrast in the upper mid-range. It can add a little bit of edge to vocals, and by that I mean like if you're listening to a vocal that is maybe a little gravelly, that graveliness might have a little bit of extra emphasis on it because of that transient and whatever the vocal thing is doing gets a little bit of emphasis there. There's also like vocals might sound, especially sibilant vocals, aren't necessarily sibilant on this set, but they can come across a little wet sounding, which can be kind of like the precursor to sibilance. So just, again, it adds a little bit of an edginess to the vocals that will come across. I think that high frequency percussion on this set is just kind of okay. We're talking about like hi-hats, drum brushes, specifically hi-hats and cymbals. They can come across a little bit on the splashy side. Now, not so much like in the sharp, peaky, uncomfortable side. They just sound a little splashy and like they don't have quite the weight behind them, the metallic weight behind them that like a really, really well executed treble does. And just overall, I would say that the timbre on this set does come across slightly artificial, partly because, well, probably largely, if not exclusively, because of that contrasty V-shaped sound signature. The bass on the Terra, I would say, is fine. It's nicely articulate with its tone. So if you're listening to a bass line that, you know, is just very subtly going between levels and tones, you can follow that along pretty well here. But it's not, again, an especially meaty, thick bass. The impact is like okay on it. It's particularly, I would say, is not particularly standout really at the price. And frankly, I would say that's probably like the biggest demerit I have on the sound here is like this is a good listening IEM. But I do think that in the sub $500, sub $300 range, there's a lot of stuff that, frankly, I think is probably competitive and does a similar sound signature. But let's compare it with some other IEMs that are more in its price range, starting with this. This is a 64 audio U4S. And it's kind of interesting. I think these are actually kind of similarly positioned, although this one is coming from Poland, whereas this one is coming from the USA. Both of these brands, Lime Ears and 64 Audio, are brands that serve, again, kind of like both the professional market as well as audiophiles. And both of these are kind of their entry-level models, 1,100 euros, $1,100. So how do these things differ? And they actually differ quite a bit. In terms of aesthetics and physical form factor, again, I'll leave that up to you. I find that the U4S fits me a lot better, and aesthetically, it's probably more my jam, even though, again, I appreciate the craftsmanship here on the Terra. Sound signature-wise, though, that is where they are more different. The U4S is just kind of like a warmer, thicker, much bassier, more laid-back sound signature. It's got some recession in kind of like the upper mid-range. It's got a little bit more extended upper treble, which could be a problem for some people. I know a lot of people have issues with the upper treble execution on 64 audio stuff. For me, it lends itself to giving that metallic ping to hi-hats and cymbals that I find lacking on a set like the Terra. So overall, I find the treble to be more satisfying here on the 64 audio. I find the bass to be more impactful and satisfying and thick and like meaty. But the downside is that maybe while you get a better sense of depth from that bass with the U4S, I do find that the sense of clarity and separation between sounds is a lot stronger on something like the Terra. It's a bit of a sacrifice here with the U4S. Now the U4S does have the adjustable bass nozzles, so you can kind of dial it up and play up the emphasis of the top end, which can kind of bring back some of that stereo separation, if you will. But I find in its ideal, for me, sound signature configuration, it is still a little bit on the stuffy side versus this, which does, I think, give a better sense of that stereo separation. I don't have this other IEM on hand. I have it on loan at the moment, so we're going to use this as a stand-in for the Dunu Glacier, which is a tribrid IEM. I think price on that one's actually a little bit more expensive at around $1,300 US. But I think it's a good comparison because, well, price is similar, but also this one is kind of also a riff on the Harman Target, whereas I think that the Terra is very clearly a riff on the Harman Target with a little bit more meat. The Dunu Glacier is kind of like Harman Target plus, like it's got more bass, more treble, and an even more scooped out mid-range versus Harman Target. But interestingly, I actually end up finding the Glacier to be the more satisfying sound. Like it's the bass presentation is really kind of something special. It's got this density to it, this hit, this impact to it that is really quite satisfying to listen to. And then the top end, while on a frequency response graph, it looks contrastier. It looks like it should be a little bit more uncomfortable to listen to versus the normal Harman Target, which is already a little bit on the contrasty side for me. I find that it actually ends up coming across a little bit smoother, a little bit like, again, that weightiness in the high frequency that I like to hear from the 64 audio. I feel like the Dunu Glacier does a pretty good job of it as well. I think the U4S might do a little bit better job, but the Glacier does a really good job. And while the frequency response looks contrastier, it looks like it's more V and it should be kind of a harsher listen than Harman, I actually find this to be an overall kind of warmer, denser, again, more satisfying sound, whereas I find the Terra to be a little bit on the clinical side. But I think that will do it for my thoughts here on the Lime Ears Terra. Again, like what kind of high-end model is this? Is this like exceptional sound for the price? I don't think so. I think it's good sound for the price, but I don't think it's exceptional. I think there's stuff that's cheaper that does a similar sound signature, maybe even better, to be honest. So really, I think that the Terra is an IEM that if you're going to be considering it, you should be considering it for the build quality, the aesthetics, the hand-builtness, the story behind Lime Ears. And I think that that is 100% a perfectly valid reason to consider an IEM like this. For me personally, I'm going to pick the other two that I mentioned. But if you want to check this thing out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. For me, I think this guy's going to be a solid 3 stars out of 5. If you want to check it out, again, linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell. Join me on Discord, which I've also got linked. And then finally, we are approaching the end of 2024, which means Yearphone of the Year Awards. I'm going to be doing announcing my favorite IEMs of the year in a couple of weeks, but I also want to hear from you. So I've got a survey running. If you haven't already participated, go to my channel, go to the community tab, and look for a link to a survey where you can tell me what is your favorite IEM of the year. And we're going to do a little award show. We'll announce my nominees, your picks, my picks, and wrap up the year that way. So yeah, participate if you want. Otherwise, I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
This review is super, yeah, yeah. This review is super, yeah, yeah. Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.